to Chapter Chats. I'm Heather, and this is my co host, Erin. This is part two of our Binding 13 deep dive series. On our last episode, we left off on Chapter 19. Chapter 20 is going to be picking up with Shannon and Marie having one of their first arguments. Erin, go ahead and tell us a little about the scene.
Yeah, so this is when they're having the argument about Shan going to Donegal for the rugby match, and Marie says she doesn't want her to go because she's uncomfortable with her being that far from her, which is interesting because given their dynamic and what we understand what's going on in the home right now, they have that huge argument where Shan's basically like, "I'm going," and this is one of my favorite chapters in the book because it shows Shan starting to come out of her shell, which is a direct impact of what Johnny is having on her. She now has something to fight for. She now has something that she wants to go up against her parents for. And obviously, one of the reasons why Shan's going to want to go to that rugby match is A, because she's never been away before. She's never really been away from home. And B, because Johnny's the star. He's going to be playing at the rugby. And C, because her friends are going to be there. So she's now starting to like claw a life back for herself. And it's showing her coming out of her shell. And then they sort of launch into an argument about Johnny, where her mum basically says, you know, I've told them that he can't come anywhere near you, which I think is really interesting because Shan, that's when she really gets angry. Like she's angry before that and she's like, just sign my permission slip. But when Marie says that, she really gets angry. And Marie's there like with the coat being like, oh, just take this coat. And she's like, basically, she's like, no, screw your coat. And I think she ends it being like, fuck my life, which I think is really interesting because she's genuinely like now being like, no, I have something I want to do. I have something I want to fight for. You can't pigeonhole me. And it relates back to when we first met Marie and she's there screaming at Johnny in Tommen. And you're like, oh, I thought she was a mama bear, but then you've now seen what happens with Teddy. But she's also trying to be protective, but protective of the wrong person in our eyes from what we're witnessing.
Yeah, and I find that very contradictory because it's like, how are you more fearful of Johnny and Shannon's friendship than you are with the relationship between Teddy and Shannon when you've seen firsthand the violence that she's been suffering from Teddy's hands for her entire life. So for her to be so adamant that Shannon stay away from Johnny, it's very hypocritical. I'm glad that Shannon kind of fights back and pushes back and says, you know what,
Yeah.
like I'm actually not going to let you like control me in this manner. And she even says, if you dare call the school and tell them about Johnny, I'll tell them everything that's happening in this home.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, Shan's got a little bark to her. Like Shannon's like she's done being controlled by Marie. So I really love that she, and like you said, pushes that boundary and says, I'm drawing a line here with Johnny and like deciding this for myself.
Yeah. It also makes you wonder what's going on with Marie at that point as to why she's so hell bent on Shan can't have a relationship on Johnny, but she's not going to do anything to protect Shan from Teddy. It makes you
Yeah.
start to question about her mum's motives, I think, because you're like, what is going on here? It doesn't really align. It doesn't really make sense, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of people have talked about how Shannon, is falling in love with the golden boy and how Marie might subconsciously be a little cautious of the fact that she too, once upon a time, fell in love with the town's golden boy. And one of the things we learn about in the sixes is that Teddy was the hurler, the popular star,
Hmm.
and he was in a sense the golden boy as well. So a lot of people talk about how, this could be her being very cautious of thinking that history is repeating itself. I wonder sometimes if subconsciously this is where her cautionary feelings are coming from.
It's just so weird though, because it just doesn't align. Like it just doesn't
Yeah,
align. It doesn't
not
make
at
any
all.
sense to me. Leading into chapter 21, this is actually one of my favorite scenes from the book because Shan's really working up the courage to go and talk to Johnny on the back of the argument with her mum, where she's like, I'm going to tell him I've straightened things out with her, that she can't do this. And she's really working up the courage. And I think it's such a display of strong masculinity from Johnny, where she marches up to him and she's like, I need to talk to you. And where she's so anxious about it, he just says, leave. And she immediately assumes it's because of her. So she turns to walk away. And then he grabs her and he's like, no, not you, them. And all his friends disperse. And I remember the first time reading that being like, okay, Johnny, wow. I was like, woo. I remember being like, you are a hot sir. Like, yeah. But honestly, not, but when you're a teenager and especially in Shannon's position, you want someone who kind of makes you feel safe like that and sort of makes you feel seen.
Another noteworthy thing that happens in the scene is Johnny confronting Shannon about the red marks on her face. And we see Shannon have that inner monologue of, oh, my father hit me with a newspaper. And we see Johnny kind of pushing for a name and tell me what happened, who did this to you. And we see Shannon kind of deflecting and trying to make excuses and not ready to tell him really what's happening at home just yet. And I appreciate that Johnny, being the bulldozer that he is kind of pushing for more information. And I think it's kind of funny how, yeah, it's like, oh, it's just allergies. And he's like, oh, yeah, I
Mhm.
have allergies too, to assholes and bullshit. So we know that Johnny's like not accepting as an answer. I appreciate Johnny's bulldozing behavior of trying to get to the bottom of what's actually happening with Shannon. Because I feel like Johnny's one of the few people that like, he notices everything about Shannon. So seeing these marks, these red marks, it's very alarming to him because he knows her past with her bullies. Although he's not aware of the abuse at home, he's very aware of what her history has been like in the schools. I think he's very hyper aware and very hyper vigilant of Shannon coming to school with any marks or bruises on her body.
I think as well with Shan is that up until this point, people will have noticed, like for instance, I think Claire at some point would have noticed, like people would have noticed, but her and her brother kind of deflect. They don't, obviously they deflect and they lie about it. But this is probably for her the first time anyone's ever really outright calling it out. And so she's super flustered about it because she's like not used to, typically she can just lie her way through it. And Johnny's there going, no, I don't believe you. He's fully like, give me a name and I'll sort it for you. So he's like, I don't believe you. Like you're lying. And I don't think she's ever had that before. I don't think she's ever had anyone call her out before, which is really interesting for their dynamic because he's obviously just not going to take a step back. He's like, no, I will be sorting this out for you, which again just proves how much of a protector he is for her, and how much he cares about her. So in chapter 22 is when Johnny gets dismissed from training because he is quite literally falling apart. And Gibbs is there and he notes he's limping again, which I think links back to us talking about how perceptive Gibbsy can be, especially in terms of Johnny. And then he goes on a bit of a tangent about how it's taken him 2 entire years to get used to being in Ballylaggin, which I think links back to our point in episode 1 where we were talking about how Johnny has had his own little strifes in life, and he didn't want to move to Cork, and his parents kind of made him and then sort of left him in the manor. So Johnny was really
Yeah.
like headstrong about the fact that he didn't want to be in Cork. And then it ends with Gibbs, I'm pretty sure, like trying to convince him to go out and get drunk, and Gibbs wants to cheer him up and Gibbs is trying to be his best friend and Johnny's like no, and in the end they end up sitting there and just get drinking whiskey together, which again I think just shows their bond, how like they don't need to be around their other friends to enjoy each other's company. And Gibbs relents. He's not there like, no, I want to go out, like come out. I mean, he is, but he in the end he's just like, cool, we'll just sit here and we'll just drink together because they're little best buddies. And they just at
Yeah.
this point they just have each other. They just need each other. And I bloody love their friendship.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's also overlooked, I mean, it's not overlooked. I think most people would agree that Johnny and Gibsy are the best duo of the series.
Hmm.
But I think what's also overlooked is how much of an emotional support Gibsy is for Johnny. And I think it's because they're always having like these funny moments of like bantering and teasing each other. But it really is like that continuous emotional support and how Gibsy is always there to pick Johnny up. And again, he's very, very perceptive. So he's aware that Johnny being released from the team is a very big deal to him, and he's aware of what it
Hmm.
means to him as well. So again, I just love how Gibsy's always there to emotionally support Johnny and is always there to lift him up when he needs it. And their bond is, I think, just it's just such a good one. I love it so much.
It's one of my favorite parts of the book is their friendship. I think is incredible. So at the start of chapter 23 is when Johnny is remarking that he hasn't spoken to Shan for 9 days. So I think that's great from your point in episode 1 where we were talking about the insta love theory between them. They actually go through quite long periods of time where they don't talk to each other. So this is another bout of like almost 2 weeks where they haven't interacted at all, and Johnny's just kind of watching her across the school. He then gets intercepted by Bella, and he is not happy about it. He tries to remain respectful. She's been harassing him. He also notes she tried to force herself on him, and he was really annoyed about it. And then she starts threatening Shan, and he absolutely loses his head, and he turns really feral on her, which I think goes to show that Johnny is supposed to be like, this man in a boy's world, and he typically can keep his head. But then it gets to Shan, and he cannot think straight. He does not react straight, and he does not react like the man he is outwardly displaying, because it comes to her and how protective he feels of her, and he just completely loses all sense, and he turns like super feral on Bella. And he's like, leave me alone, like leave her alone, do not drag her into this, because Bella starts making little comments about Shan.
One thing I think a lot of people do overlook is just how long Bella and Johnny were hooking up for. And he's very clear that there was never a relationship. There were never any feelings. It was straight just hooking up. So I think that Johnny's very aware of how manipulative Bella is. He talks about it often. So when Bella brings up Shannon, it really does become a trigger for him because he knows how fragile Shannon is and he knows how vicious Bella is. So I think that's another reason why his guard just kind of flew up because he knew what Bella was capable of and he
Mhm.
knows how fragile Shannon was. And so I think for him, he had to kind of make sure he was very stern and strict with Bella to like leave her alone because again, he's very aware of Shannon's history.
When we turn to chapter 24, Shan literally opens it up with, I always knew when a storm was brewing at home, which links back to what we were talking about in episode 1, where she's extremely hypervigilant. And her hypervigilance that week was so intensified in everything that was going on, to the point that she was in a state of anxiety because she had called the police on her own dad because she couldn't handle what was going on at home, which I don't think was the usual for her. I don't think she usually would call the police, but that week she had, and then she's terrified that her dad is going to find out.
So, chapter 24, after they run into each other, we have Shannon who kind of sprints back into the school bathroom because, as you mentioned, she had that hypervigilance where she was aware that something bad was coming. And of course, we have Johnny who's trailing after her to make sure she's okay. And Shannon kind of leans her head against the locker once she makes it into the third year hallway. And she's telling herself, like, stop panicking, just breathe, just breathe. And then she drops to the ground and immediately starts vomiting. And we have Johnny who comes in and is rubbing her back, telling her it's okay. And as he's rubbing her back, he's noticing that she has bruising on her neck. And he says, "Where did you get these from?" And she says, "Oh, it's old." And he says, "It doesn't look old." And so I think again, Johnny's starting to piece together all these bruises and bumps that Shannon's coming to school with, and it's very, very alarming to him. But I appreciate in the scene just how comforting he is to her. And he says, "I'll be right back. I'm going to get a janitor to come clean this up." And she's saying, "Oh no, no, I can clean up myself. I'm very used to this." So now Johnny's also, even though he read it in her file that she vomits quite frequently, he's kind of seeing firsthand, like, oh, like this really is something that she struggles with. And she runs into the bathroom and she's rinsing out her mouth, brushing her teeth, and comes back. And Johnny's like, "Oh, I told you not to go anywhere." And she says, "Oh, sorry, I had to brush my teeth, freshen up." And I think that is just so sad. The fact that like she's carrying around a toothbrush because she's
Mhm.
vomiting all day, multiple times a day, just from like the sheer level of anxiety that she has. I think that's just so overlooked about Shannon. Appreciate that Johnny is, of course, like, "I'm taking you home," and doesn't take no for an answer because again, he's realizing like you can't stay at school when you're in a physical state like this. I think the unfortunate thing that Johnny doesn't realize just yet is that her going home is what's causing her the anxiety. Her home life is where all this anxiety
Yeah.
is coming from. And so I think that, of course, I mean, he is saving her in this moment and taking her home to kind of get her out of the situation. It's just sad that he doesn't realize is that her going home is what's creating that anxiety inside of her.
Also, what I really loved about this, because when I first read it and she was there being sick, I was like, oh, he's probably going to be really grossed out. He's probably going to be really freaked out by it. Like, I knew he had read her file, but you would think that, most people can't really handle that sort of environment. So I was like, oh, he's probably going to be super grossed out, make some kind of comment that's going to offend her. But he was completely unfazed. He genuinely didn't care. He was like, people are sick. I don't care. He was more concerned with her than he was about the fact she was being sick. And I loved that, because I was like, good on him for that, because a lot of people wouldn't have that reaction.
So then leading into chapter 25, we're in Johnny's POV, where we see him not even worried about the fact that Shannon is vomiting, just a general sense of concern for her and how she's feeling. And he notes that how the entire time home, she's just profusely apologizing and feels so guilty that he had to witness this. And little does she know that Johnny could care less about the fact that she's actually vomiting. He's just concerned for her overall health. And then as soon as they arrive to the house, Shannon gets out of the car. And as she's walking away, Johnny has like this second guess of, wait, I actually don't want her to leave. So he calls out to Shannon and says, "Wait, come with me. Do you want to go somewhere with me?" And she's like, "You wanna go somewhere with me?" And Johnny's like, "Yeah, Shannon, I do." I think that's just, like, so cute because she doubts
Mhm.
him wanting to actually spend time with her, and little does she know all he wants to do is spend time with her. She's the only thing on his mind. So they get together in the car and they head to Biddy's. She's kind of sitting in the chair with Johnny, and he's buying her just a very basic meal. I think he notes it's just soup and Coke, and she's so grateful for it. And she kinda notes, like, "I have nothing left to give you, or I have nothing to give you in return." And it kinda shows you how Shannon has that sense of insecurity about what she can offer Johnny and being worried about what she can give back to him. And again, little does she know all he wants to do is spend time with her.
I think as well in this chapter, they're talking about rugby, and it's once again Shan has no idea what the academy is, and she asks him, and he's like, and he says something like, "Oh, he's on this strict diet," and she's like, "Well, you're not allowed sweet treats." Not, she's like, "It sounds horrible." She's literally never heard what the academy is. She has no idea what it is, which must be really refreshing for Johnny, as we pointed out in episode one, where people only ever really liked him for his status, for the fact that he was good at rugby, and Shan's there like, "I have literally no idea what you're talking about. Like, I don't know what the academy is." And then all of a sudden she sort of clams up, and Johnny kind of notices, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And he starts trying to soothe her. And he's like, what's happening here? What's like, why are you suddenly so upset? And he starts realizing that there are these people staring at her from across the bar. And I'm pretty sure she remarks that she feels safe with him, which for her we know is a big step because of her ongoing. She's never learned to really trust anyone, never learned to feel safe with anyone. And she remarks, "Oh, I actually feel quite safe with this guy." And I remember reading that and being like, "Oh, you poor little baby angel." Like the poor girl. She's got this guy looking after her, and she's like, "Oh, he makes me feel safe." And I'm just like, "Babe, oh, I want to hug you."
I know. Well, and we have to remember the only time that Shannon gets attention, it's always been negative attention, right? She talks about
Hmm.
how boys are always commenting on her, asking her to do things. And when she's getting attention from girls, it's usually malicious bullying behavior. So anytime she's ever been given attention, it's always been negative in ways that she didn't want it. So this is a different type of attention where she's kind of again climbing up the anxiety of, okay, why is everyone staring? And realizing it's not about her so much, it's about Johnny and kind of what he symbolizes in the public. And then after this, Johnny takes him to a private room in Biddy's still, where it's kind of supposed to be, I guess, what more of a hangout, you would say, a different room that's more
Yeah.
closed off. And they sit there, they're talking, and Shannon kind of looks across and she sees some of her old bullies from primary school as well as BCS. And we see her immediately say, I think I'm ready to go home. And I like that Johnny immediately picked up on what the problem was and kind of says, you know what?
Mhm.
No, we're not going to go anywhere. And he wasn't trying to be rude or disrespectful to Shannon. He even says to her, like, put your chin up, Shannon Lynch. Like, I've got you. I'm not going to let anyone say anything to you. And so I think,
Yeah.
again, it's this first time that anyone's ever said, like, you see her trying to, in a sense, kind of cower in fear because she remembers what happened when she was around these girls and what they did to her. And we have Johnny who's saying, pick your chin up, Shannon. Like, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. And then, of course, as soon as they finish their meal, Johnny tells Shannon to go square up with the barmaids and that he's going to be right back, meet me in the car. And this is where we have Johnny confronting all of them at the table. And I think this is the first time we see just how far Johnny is willing to go to, in a sense, protect Shannon and protect her dignity.
But because he notes in this chapter, he's like, "This wasn't me. I'm not the reactor. I think shit through." But he's very much reacting anytime he thinks that Shan is in some kind of danger, and he immediately starts reacting with the bullies. And his protector mode is just activated just from them looking at her, just from Shan being uncomfortable. He's there marching over to them. What my favorite thing about this chapter is, I think Johnny's aware that Shan doesn't like violence, even though like it's not a conversation that's taken place, because he gets Ronan when we talked about in episode 1, he gets Ronan to walk away because Shan looks so terrified, and again he does it here. He gets her to walk away where she can't see how he's going to react, and he does it where she's not going to be a witness to his actions, basically.
And you've
Yeah.
talked quite a bit about the violence between a lot of these male main characters and other
Mm.
individuals, and how you really struggle with how you've seen them react in these violent tendencies, which I think is a very fair criticism to have because, again, like resulting to violence, as you previously said, is never going to be the answer. And I think we
Mm-mm.
kind of see Johnny losing his cool, but you've kind of talked extensively about why it bothers you so much. So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk more about that.
Yeah, so I have a thing where like Johnny's supposed to be this man in this boy's world who is super intelligent, super smart, quite emotionally aware, very perceptive, has this one of the themes of the book as well is Johnny consistently talking about the age gap between him and Shannon, which is a year and 10 months, and how that's going to get him arrested. But when it comes to protecting Shannon, he has absolutely no penchant for beating the ever living crap out of anyone who so much as looks badly at her. And I think there are methods and ways which don't involve this, especially for me. I know that they can't hit girls, and that's quite a big theme in the book. But the boyfriends and the brothers are completely innocent, and people say, "Yeah, but they're brothers and sisters of bullies." Okay, but by that same token, if you're going to take accountability for what your brother or sister does, then Joey should take accountability for the fact that Darren left. Like it's not reflective of your brother or your sibling is not reflective of what you're doing. You can't really hold that up and say, "Well, they deserved it because." Their sibling was doing it, or their boyfriend or their girlfriend was doing it. It doesn't really hold much weight with me. And I just think, considering how smart they all are, and considering how good they all are, and considering they focus on things like the age gap, but he's quite happy to just pummel the life out of someone completely innocent. I always just found it a bit odd. I was
Yeah.
just, yeah, was always like, I don't get the reaction. But obviously, it's
Yeah.
protector mode.
We see how Johnny threatens Sierra's boyfriend and basically says, if your girlfriend ever says anything to Shannon again, it's going to be your face. And we kind of talked about how, like, is this a fair method for him to kind of be displaying and, his act of retribution? Is it actually fair to be beating up the boyfriend because of the girlfriend's actions towards Shannon? I think that some people are like, oh, like, I'm all for it because he's defending Shannon. There's some people like, okay, well, this is objectively wrong because he's innocent. I think that I lean on more so the fact that it is objectively wrong because we get the idea, we get the intent, we get why he's doing this. But again, technically, the boyfriend is, in a sense, completely innocent. He had nothing to do with that, and he couldn't have even known her when this was happening.
Where's the line in like you like that he's angry at them for hurting Shan, but now he's hurting someone? So where's the line where you're perpetrating the same behaviors you're saying that you hate doing, or you're saying that you hate happening to other people? You can't continue the cycle and expect the cycle to break. Like you're just perpetrating the same behaviors. But he's not actually as contained as like he thinks he is, and as we read him to be. Because when it comes to beating the crap out of people, he's quite for it. He's all for using his fists. So, you know,
Yeah.
but he's perpetrating the same behaviors that they're claiming to hate, which I just find very interesting of a dynamic.
Yeah. Chapter 28 and 29 is where we start to see some of the biggest contrasts between Shannon's day to day life and Johnny's day to day life. all of chapter 28 is Shannon basically notating how she has spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, and taking care of her brothers. Then we switch over to Johnny's POV and we see him wrangling with the fact that he is now being reprimanded for his skills on the rugby field. And we see him go home and kind of sulking about how what a horrible day he's had. But his horrible day is rooted in having a poor day with rugby. And Shannon's day is filled with nothing but chores, cooking, and cleaning. So just seeing that drastic contrast between their lives. And then we have Gibsy who shows up to Johnny's house and, he's happy he's saying, let's go to Biddy's and have a good time. And he kind of notes how Gibsy hadn't been drinking at all. And he realized, like, oh, Gibsy tricked me to be able to get me out to
Mhm.
Biddy's. And I think it's just so funny between the two of them because we see very clearly what Gibsy was doing and how he knew that in order to get Johnny out of that house, he was going to have to get him a little bit tipsy before he was going to be able to convince him to get out to Biddy's with the rest of their friends.
So in chapter 29, Johnny's like, oh, Katie's a given. She'll definitely be with the lads because Huey rarely leaves the girls' side, which I think is really interesting when you get to later books as to what the dynamic really is. But Johnny's consistently noting that Huey and Katie are always together and they don't leave each other's side and they're obsessed with each other throughout the entire
Yeah, I think even in
13s.
chapter 30. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's actually in chapter 30 when they get to Biddy's and he's noting how Katie and Huey are interacting. And
Hmm.
he's just like, he never left the redhead side. He was obsessed with her, which,
Yeah.
okay, makes sense because hello, it's Katie. I'd be obsessed with her too. But yeah, I think it's so funny as we start to learn the contrast between the two of them and what's actually happening, just to see like what their dynamic looks like from other people's POVs when it's
Yeah.
versus what's actually happening.
And I think coming back to what you were saying about the contrast is that chapter 30, Shannon is completely battered at this point. Teddy really got to her. Joey was out at the cinema with his girlfriend, which also shows that Joey isn't in the house as much as Shan is. He doesn't have the same commitments to the house that Shan does. She doesn't really have a life outside of Johnny, which we talked about in episode 1. And whilst he was out, she has been completely and utterly annihilated by Teddy. And then Marie and Teddy have completely abandoned them. And Shannon and Joey's reaction to that is not one of surprise, it's not one of worry, it's not one of even fear. They're very used to being left alone. And it's Joey's girlfriend, Aoife, who is like having a bit of a meltdown about the fact that there are no adults and they don't seem bothered at all, that they're completely on their own. She's kind of like, oh, is this normal for you guys? Do you have an adult to call? And they're like, no, it's absolutely fine. And then Shan also makes like the mental note of she's worried that if Aoife asked Joey, Joey would leave. Like he would go with Aoife. And she's there like kind of fretting about it, but she's also like, I get it, like I understand it, but she is fretting about it because she notes that her brother is so in love with this girl.
Mhm. And one of the things we also see in this chapter is just how even though Aoife and Joey are very close and have a great relationship and very much in love, there are things that Joey hasn't told Aoife just yet
Mm,
about their past. And one of the things that they have a discussion about is what happened to them the last time they were in care. So Aoife says, "Is there anyone that you can call?" And she basically talks about like, "Why don't you guys go to the authorities?" So then Joey finally has that heart to heart with her about what happened the last time the authorities got involved. And we
mhm,
see Shannon being very, very hesitant. In fact, she even says, "Joe, don't say it." And he still continues to tell Aoife exactly what happened, which is that when, Darren was 11, Joey was 6, and Shannon was 3 years old, Murray went to the foster care system and basically said, due to my health, I can't take care of my children. I need to place them temporarily. And so while they were in that home, we know that Shannon and Joey were placed together and they know that they had a very nice home to be in. And although it wasn't home, at least they were together. Whereas Darren had a very, very different experience. And I think that one thing that's very overlooked in this fandom is actually Darren's trauma and what he went through while
mhm,
he was in the care. And he talks about how things happen to Darren that should never happen to children, alluding to the fact that Darren was severely sexually abused while he was in care. And that when Marie finally came around and was able to go back to the courts and request custody back, they did give her custody back of all 3 children. And Joey notes, before we went to care, Darren was a very different person. And he also says that Teddy was a very different person. And I think it's very interesting that for somebody who has so much hatred for Teddy, and rightfully so, Joey was fine to say, he actually wasn't that bad before we went into care. And we
yeah,
know that Darren being sexually abused is what changed a lot about Teddy. And he even notes Teddy could not get over what happened to Darren when the information came out. And that's when Teddy turned to the drink. And that's when the violence truly started in their homes. I think it's very
yeah.
interesting that people, one, overlook the abuse that Darren had when he was in care, and also how the entire home dynamic for the Lynch family changed when they all came back from care and Teddy learned this information about Darren.
Yeah. I think as well with Darren, he's obviously a very morally grey character from because we're reading it from Shan's perspective and then Joey's perspective. And I think he's a very interesting character, but I do think he's very overlooked for what he would have had to have gone through. And I think with Darren, like it's kind of noted that he would also act as a buffer with Teddy and that he could be a very good way to sort of get around Teddy. But as we know, Darren isn't around anymore and he left them. So it's kind of like D-Day for them. It's a very dark day when Darren left because Teddy's drinking had gotten worse and their violence had gotten worse. Their life had gotten infinitely worse from when Darren left, which harbors a lot of ill feelings towards their brother, whilst they recognize that what he went through. And I think because we're getting that perspective from Shan and then later from her brother, we get these feelings towards Darren from their perspective. And I feel like if we were to get it from Darren's perspective, we would have so much more empathy and understanding, especially if we went back in time to see what happened when he was in the foster home.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And the other thing I want to know about this scene is Aoife's reaction to this news and talking about how, like, let me help you guys however I can. And we see just how much Aoife cares about the Lynch family as a whole and how, even though she's with Joey, she does care about his siblings. And
Hmm.
she offers him financial help. And we see Joey be like, oh, no, like, that's too much. You can't do that. And we see her kind of arguing back and forth, like, no, I want to help you. And Shannon kind of looks away, thinking, okay, this moment's too intimate for me to be witnessing because for her, she kind of realizes, like, this level of attachment and love and security could potentially be what makes Joey want to eventually leave. And she even
Hmm.
notes that, like, I would not be able to blame him if he jumped ship because if I had the opportunity, I would as well.
Yeah.
And it's just a sad, sad thing to see Shannon kind of noting that, like, and having the feeling of, one day he's going to leave me, but I can't even blame him because I see what this love is doing to him, the sense of security, and how she would even want that for herself one day.
Yeah. And also it goes to show how sort of unloved her brother has been and how it's such a heartwarming moment for her to see it to the point that she understands if he leaves the life for that she gets it because he's so used to like not having any affection, not having any care, and he's so used to
Mhm.
carrying the load that she's like if he chooses the light I will completely understand. So I think it's interesting, whilst in that chapter, we're really getting a sense of what Joey and Shannon's life has been like. Johnny is currently in Biddy's getting drunk, and he's like looking at his friends. He's sort of perceiving things like he says about Hugh again. He reiterates for some unknown reason. He's like obsessed with the tiny redhead under his arm. And it's like Johnny can't conceptualize the idea of having a girlfriend whilst he's simultaneously obsessing over Shannon, which is really funny. And then he also notes that Hugh told him that Katie's insecure, which I think is interesting given what we sort of later learn about Hugh and how we're supposed to be perceiving him. But yet he's divulging his girlfriend's secrets to his friends, which is very interesting. And then Johnny gets drunk and he starts thinking about Shan like endlessly and he wants to drunk dial her and he's just like obsessed with her, which is funny because he's like can't conceptualize his friend's girlfriend, but at the same time he's like, oh, Shannon like the river, I love you. And he's just there like having all these thoughts about Shan. And then Cormac, who is dating Bella, who Johnny had a fling with, corners him for some unknown reason, and Gibsy jumps in to protect him straight away, no questions asked. Gibsy's up on his feet in Cormac's face being like, back off brother, because if one thing Gibbs is going to do, he's going to jump in and defend the people that he loves, and he's right there in Cormac's face, and it's actually Johnny who has to then diffuse Gibbs and Cormac. He's like, Johnny's the one. Cormac was coming over to Gibbs, and Johnny's the one who's like, no, 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 Gibbs, like, calm yourself, bro.
And that's why I love Johnny and Gibsy so much, is that no matter what is happening, Gibsy is always there to defend him. And actually, in the previous date with Johnny and Shannon, whenever Johnny is attacking Sierra's boyfriend, one of his friends tries to jump in and he says, back off, lad, you don't want to get involved. And his friend actually walks away. And Johnny actually calls him a derogatory name and says, Gibsy would never do this. And so I think it's just funny that we're now going back to Biddy's again and we're seeing that the moment Johnny's in trouble, Gibsy's the first person to get up and get in
Hmm.
Cormac's face. So I just love how protective Gibsy is of Johnny without question, continuously throughout this entire series. And then we have Johnny who kind of diffuses the situation, and then he
Yeah.
tells all of them to go ahead and head home. So he has Huey take Gibsy and say, meet me at my house, get him out of here. And then we have Katie who's actually lingering by asking Johnny if he's okay. And he's like, I'll be okay, go ahead. And she hesitates. She doesn't want to leave him. She's like, are you sure? And he's like, "Yeah, like, absolutely, go ahead, I'll figure out my way home." And so I think it's interesting that Katie is here trying to diffuse the situation, and even though Johnny is saying, "Be there in just a minute," she's not quite ready to walk away, and so I do think this
Hmm.
is very interesting thing about Katie's character, is that in my opinion, she seems to be someone who's very conflict avoidant, and again, we kind of see her hesitation of like, "Are you sure you want me to leave?" So I really like that Katie was kind of almost trying to give Johnny that out he needed to kind of leave with all of them and kind of just let all of this go.
Yeah, and I think to note in that is she's there warily looking between him and Cormac, and she's like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" He's like, I'll be grand, like just go." And she's there like staring between them, and she's the one who doesn't want to leave. She's like kind of trying to coax Johnny into going with her, but like throughout it, she seems kind of, he's literally a few sentences before talking about how insecure and quiet she is, and how she's glued to Huey's side. But then she's there being like, "No, I don't want to leave you in this. Like you should be coming with us." And he's like, "No, I'll be grand." And she sort of like slowly walks away, like she doesn't want to go. And I think that's really interesting and kind of like a testament to her character and who she'll be later down in the books.
So while Cormac and Johnny are having a conversation, he's like, "You know what? I'll have a conversation with you, but not in front of Bella." And then we have Cormac and Johnny who take their conversation outside and they're kind of recapping all the drama that they have because of Bella. And we see Johnny saying, "You're my teammate first, but like you could have just talked to me." And you also start to see that, like, it really is true how Johnny really never actually cared about Bella. He says to him, like, "If I knew you liked Bella, I would have backed off immediately. Like it was never like that." I do appreciate they were able to kind of mend that rift between them because, Cormac says, "I don't want this to affect us in the field." And of course, Johnny is like, he's very career focused. He's very straight line on what is his priority. So we again see him reinforcing this idea that this minor issue is never going to be a big issue to him because at the end of the day, he understands rugby comes first, and I'm never going to jeopardize the rugby game for your personal feelings over a girl. After this conversation with Cormac, Johnny is now trying to phone a taxi to get himself back home. And then he goes to his contacts and he starts to realize that Gibsy has changed all of the contact names in his phone. And then this is one of the funniest scenes. And my favorite part is how he actually changes his coach's name under call if you need a good time. And he calls the phone number and it's his coach that picks up. And so it's like Gibsy is just so funny. And I think
He's
he
a
even changes his
menace.
own name to King Clit, I believe, which is just such a
Yeah.
vulgar, insane thing to do. And so I love that, like, he's going through his contact list trying to figure out who he can call, and the fact that he has no idea who anyone is, it kinda leaves him just stumped, and so he says, "You know what? Never mind, I'm gonna go to the Chipper and get a burger," because at this point he is drunk, and the only thing he's craving is a greasy burger.
King Clit keeps calling Johnny, and he's like, he can't get a taxi. He's being harassed by King Clit, who he doesn't know who King Clit is. And Joey turns up with Aoife, and they're like, Joey is like, Johnny Kavanagh. Johnny's like, no fan pictures today, like no fan pictures today, which knowing Joe, he's probably like, who the hell are you? Like, who are you to say that to me? Joey would be like, I don't care about your bloody pictures. And then he's like, no, no. And then Johnny has like this revelation moment where he realizes it's Shannon's brother. And suddenly he's straightening up, even though he's drunk and he's leaning against the wall and he's eating his burger. He's suddenly like, oh shit, it's Shannon's brother. And he's straightening up. And Aoife, with a little mischievous grin on her face, is like, should we give you a lift? Do you want us to drive you home? And Joey's like, no. And so Johnny gets into Joey's car, and as they start to pull off, the next thing they know, there is a man on their bonnet screaming, give me back my centre. And of course, who else would it be? It's Gibsy. Gibbs is there on the car thinking that Joey is kidnapping Johnny from the town centre.
And so we have Gibsy. I can just imagine it now, like Huey and Katie in the car with Gibsy being pulled over, and Gibsy says the officer shined the light on his face, and he panics and he gets out of the car and takes off running. And so he's like, "I've been running around looking for you for hours." So he gets out of the car, lifts the seat up so that Gibsy can climb in the back seat. And so we have Johnny and Gibsy, who are these two massive rugby players who are squeezing in this tiny little car. And we have Joey who's, grunting, pushing the seat back, and he's like, "All right, is there anybody else, like, off we're going," type behavior. So I think it's just so funny that Joey, of all people, gets stuck with Johnny and Gibsy, who are drunk in his back seat, and having to drive them 30 miles outside of town to drop them off at the house.
I think one of my favorite things about it as well is Johnny and Gibsy are being Johnny and Gibsy, and they're just making like kind of joke. Well, Gibbs is being Gibbs, and Johnny's like, "Shut up!" And then Aoife's at the front, and she's like, "Aren't they so funny, Joe? Aren't they so funny?" And Joey's being his sarcastic self, and he's like, "No." And then Johnny's like relaying to Gibbs, like, "Yeah, this is Shannon's brother," and they think they're being really subtle, and they're not being subtle. But he's like, "This is Shannon's brother," and Gibbs is like, "Oh, little Shannon." And then he's like, Johnny's there, like basically being like, "I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you for doing this to me." Which is just as awkward things could go. When that's the girl that you like and it's her brother, and especially with Johnny's in his head about this age gap, and when Joey called him way back when Johnny drives her home for the first time, he's like, "Are you aware she's 15?" So now he's there like, I need to impress this guy, and they're just completely freaking out about it. It's interesting as well because this is the night before Shannon's birthday. So this is what Joey and Aoife are doing. And obviously we know that they went to go to the chipper and now they are driving to Johnny's manor to drop him off. And then they leave Johnny and they go home for Shannon's birthday, which is the next day when they wake up. So whilst all this is going on, Shannon is quite literally asleep, oblivious to what is happening. And then she wakes up for her birthday the next day. And for her birthday, from Joey, she gets a CD, and for from Aoife, she gets perfume, which she's like really grateful and really happy for. And I think it's really cute again that people, I think quite a lot of people like to reiterate that Aoife didn't care about the other lynches, but she quite literally bought Shannon perfume for her birthday, which she didn't have to do. She does that for Shannon because she wants to make her birthday memorable. And Shannon's like over the moon at this perfume. She's really happy about it, which again I think shows how cute their relationship is forming and how they're becoming like sisters as well.
The thing I really appreciate about this chapter is we start to see, again, like you said, just how much Aoife does care about the Lynch family. We know that Teddy and Marie are still very much MIA, and Shannon notes how there was no food in the cupboards and no food in the fridge, but they come downstairs and they wake up to all the cupboards filled with food. The fridge is filled with food. And there's a stack of envelopes that Aoife has left where she has budgeted all their money for the week. And one of the envelopes that she leaves is an envelope with a note that says, "Take your sister out to lunch for her birthday." And so
Hmm.
again, like this idea, in my opinion, that Aoife doesn't care about these children is just so incorrect because she very clearly cares about the entire Lynch family and
Yeah.
is there to support them in their times of need. And so, Joey says, "All right, girlfriend's orders, we're going to get food." And then, they decide on where they're going to go and they hop in the car. And as they're driving, they hear a phone buzz. I think one of the funniest things ever is when they finally discover the phone, they flip it open, they see King Clit is calling. And as we know from the last chapter, King Clit is Gibsy. So she answers the
Hmm.
phone and realizes that it's Gibsy. And, Joey and Shannon have a little conversation and he basically fills her in about like what happened. And she's like, "Wait, you were at Johnny Kavanaugh's house last night? Like, what's going on?" And so I think it's just like a funny little scene between them where he's like, "Oh, yeah, like I was with him last night. They were drunk. We took them home. And, it is what it is type behavior."
I think as well for this,
And
where Joey is perceptive is he's picking up on the vibe already that there's something going on with Shan and Johnny, with very little interactions between them. Obviously, we've had Johnny driving her home, and then he's got in the car, and he and Gibbsy are elbowing each other, and now Shan's like, "Hang on, what? Tell me more information." And because Joey is perceptive, he's like, "Oh, what's happening here?" You know?
yeah, and she's really nervous to go to Johnny's house. And he's like, "We're
Hmm.
just dropping off a phone. Why do you care? Like, why are you so nervous?" And he's like, "It's okay if you like him, Shan." And she's like, "No, I don't like him. It's none of that." And so I think it's just so funny to see how in Joey's POV, he was telling Johnny to kind of stay away from Shannon. But then in Shannon's POV, when they're talking about Johnny, he's very much teasing her and saying, like, "It's okay if you like him, Shannon."
Kind of excited by the idea that she's going to be having a life. So he's sort of encouraging her a little bit.
Yeah, and I appreciate that Joey likes to protect Shannon, but he doesn't clip her wings. He lets her
Yeah.
be a child. He lets her be a girl who likes a boy, and he's still realistic with her, but still
Hmm.
lets her make her own decisions without trying to control her or make her do or act a certain way. He's very much
Yeah.
like, "I will still protect you, but I'm still allowing you to make these decisions for yourself." And I really appreciate that about Joey because we know that she has very limited freedom. She has very little things to do that actually bring her joy. So the fact that he's seeing her actually have what he views as probably like her first little crush, and he's again, he's protective of her, but he's still letting her make that choice for herself.
Yeah. Obviously, they arrive at the manor to drop the phone off, and Shan refuses to get out the car. And Joey's like teasing her, being like, "You need to get out the car." And she's like, "No, I'm just going to stay here and wait." And he's like, "Okay, suit yourself," because he's no mess. So he's like, "Whatever." He goes inside, and then he literally says, "Hey, Cav, see if you can get my sisters to come out of the car." And Johnny is like, "What? You've left her out there in the cold?" And he's like, "She doesn't want to come inside. Like, what do you want me to do?" So Johnny immediately is going stalking out there, and he finds her being mauled by his dogs, and she's like covered in dogs. She walks inside and she stinks of dog. And Joey's like, "Ugh, take a shower." I think at this point as well, Gibbs has roped Joey into cooking because he can't cook.
Yeah,
He's going to
yeah,
set himself on
yeah.
fire. So
Because
somehow
Gibsy was
Joey's now
supposed to
cooking.
make a meal for Joey, and Joey realizes you have no idea what you're doing. Like,
Yeah.
step away from the stove, and I'll take over.
Yeah. So Joe's now cooking. And he's like to Shan, "You need to have a shower because you stink." And Shan's like, "I can't shower at Johnny Kavanagh's house." And he's like, "You have to go shower." And Johnny's like, "It's fine, you can shower here." So he like takes her up to his bedroom to go and shower, and he comes back down. And then there's a bit of a confrontational scene about Joey, but I feel like you might have some thoughts on that, so you can talk about it.
Oh, yeah. So we have Johnny who takes Shannon upstairs, and while he's showing her around, he kind of notices more bruising on her body. So when he comes downstairs and he talks to Joey, he's like, "All right, we need to have a private conversation." And he actually asks Gibsy to leave. And he basically says, "All right, tell me what's going on with your sister." And basically tells Joey, "I've seen the bruises, I've seen the marks on her. Tell me who's putting your hands on your sister and I'll fix it." And we have Joey who's like, "Oh, like," and I think Joey's kind of like, "Oh, like, the ball's on this guy," which
Hmm.
to be fair, like he's making very bold accusations because again, he's a bulldozer. And I think I like this scene is because it shows that even to Shannon's own brother, Johnny does not care. All he knows is that somebody is putting their hands on Shannon and he is going to find out who is doing it and he's going to fix it. And then we have Joey, who again, who's not ready really to tell him. And he even notes, I would like to tell you, but Shannon wouldn't want me to tell you what's going on. So you have to be worth it and she will tell you. So Johnny's saying worth it. What do you mean worth it? What does that mean? Because obviously that doesn't make any sense to him, right? So given their past experience of people being involved in their family business, we know what happened with the care situation, so we know why Joey is very hesitant to talk to Johnny about it, but we see again how Johnny is a protector. And he even says, "Are you the one putting hands on your sister?" And that's where we see Joey finally get defensive, like, "I would never put hands on my sister or any girl for that matter," because again,
Yeah.
he's watched the abuse take place in his household where he's seen a man put his hands on a woman, and he feels very, very strongly about men putting their hands on women, as we see in later books as well. Joey gets this phone call from Teddy and basically learns that Marie has had a miscarriage and that's why she has been gone MIA this entire weekend. So he tells Johnny, "Can you keep an eye on my sister? I need to leave her here. I'll be right back for her." And Johnny's like, "You want me to just keep her?" And he's like, "Yeah, can you do that for me? Can you keep her?"
Mhm.
And Johnny's like, "Yeah, I can keep her safe." And so Joey takes off and is off to deal with the family. In chapter 30, when Shannon and Joey are talking about Marie and Teddy leaving, we see a lot of resentment that Joey has, of course, for Teddy and Marie and the life that they're living. But when we get to the following chapters and we see how they call and ask Joey for help, Joey is right there to help again because he knows and he's kind of the one who's always picking up the pieces for this family. So it's just like another example of how when things have completely gone to shit, and despite his resentment towards Teddy and Marie, he is always there to pick up the pieces and put his family back together again. Joey and Johnny are having this heated conversation about who is putting their hands on Shannon, leaving bruises on her. Shannon's upstairs in La La Land trying to figure out how to turn on Johnny's shower. And one of my favorite parts about in this chapter is how Shannon notes when she gets out of the shower, Shannon's putting on his sweatpants. And she literally says, "His genitals have been here. My genitals are now here. We're practically having sex." It's like
Oh,
Shannon's like,
Shannon.
girl, that is not how it works. But it just goes to show you just how innocent Shannon is. And like, I think it's just so funny to kind of see her have this reaction to putting on another boy's clothes and how she's immediately is like, oh my goodness, like this is so intimate. This is so sexual. And it's just so funny because, again, she's just so innocent and just so meek and has no experience with boys,
Mhm.
right? Like she's never even kissed a boy yet. And so for her to have like this idea that we're practically having sex, I just think this moment is so funny for Shannon.
Yeah, it's very, very cute. Well, not cute, but like it just shows how innocent she is. But she also remarks, like, at one point, she's like, "Oh, I've read books, like I know about it, but oh, clearly not, babe. Like, clearly you don't."
Yeah.
I also want to note that in this scene, when she walks into it, she notes that Johnny's room is really messy. There's clothes everywhere, like it's just a bit of a pigsty, and that also across his walls, he has pictures of half naked women. But then she also notes that she finds the picture of him and her from the rugby shield under, I think it's under his bed on the floor. The picture's just in there, and she's a bit like, "Oh, why does he have this?" And especially because she's having all these feelings towards him, where they're practically having sex because their genitals have been in clothes, and he also has this picture of her, and she's like, "Oh, why does he have the picture?" So she gets a bit like, not funny, but like she's a bit nervous about why he's even got it there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. After Johnny and Shannon come back downstairs, he's having a conversation with Shannon and kind of filling her in on what actually happened because she realizes that Joey has left. So he's the one who has to break the news to her that like her mother has had a miscarriage and he's there to kind of console her. And he even asks, like, oh, like, do you want to talk about it? And at that point, Shannon's not really ready to talk about what goes on in their family or her feelings towards her mother. And this is actually where she tells him, like, oh, today's actually my birthday. And so Johnny feels horrible because, like, oh, like, it's your birthday of all days. I should have never told you this. This should never be happening on your birthday. And, she's like, you know what? It's okay. Like, my birthday's not a big deal. And we kind of see again how Shannon is always trying to make herself so small, even on her own birthday. And so Johnny tries to kind of make the moment better by saying, we can do anything you want to. And they settle on watching a movie together. And kind of as they're watching the movie together, we see Shannon who talks about how like she's slowly inching herself closer to Johnny. And see we see her kind of breaking out that like that shy shell where she wants to be physically close to him, where she's ready to start
Hmm.
having these moments where she's like actually with a boy and having like these flirtatious little actions. And we have Johnny who finally puts his arm around her and she knows how like she feels so comfortable and safe in Johnny's arms.
Which also Mr. like, "Oh, it's a big age gap. It's a big age gap, and I've got to keep my head on." And then anytime she's near, he's like, "Let me just touch you. Let me just put my arm around you. Let me just be close to you." And it's like, Johnny, pick a lane, babe. Pick a
Yeah.
lane.
So as Johnny and Shannon are cuddling watching the movie, Shannon falls asleep and Johnny gets a phone call from Joey saying, I'll be there in 5 minutes. And as Joey gets there, he's kind of talking to Johnny, filling him in on what happened. And Shannon kind of wakes up and says, like, oh, like Joey, you're back. And we see Joey telling Shannon, like, it's time to go home. And Johnny starts to panic because he doesn't want her to leave. I think he even says, like, don't leave, like she can stay. And Joey kind of interrupts and says, no, we've got to go home now. And of course, Johnny is very unaware of the home dynamic between Joey and Shannon. So for him, he's not really sure why Joey's so insistent that she leaves, but we see him just having that internal conflict of how can I get Shannon to stay? And obviously, ultimately, Shannon ends up leaving with Joey, but Johnny kind of runs out to the car and it's just like, Shannon, like, you can stay, you can stay. And she's like, I've got to go home, Johnny. And so she gets in the car and he's literally standing next to the car door, just staring into Shannon's eyes. And as they're driving home, I think that one of the saddest scenes in this chapter is how Joey and Shannon have a conversation about Marie's miscarriage. And he even says, do you feel relieved? And she's like, I do feel relieved. And they're referring to the miscarriage. They never say it, but it's very apparent of what they're actually talking about. And
Hmm.
I think it's so sad to see how they feel guilty. I think Shannon notes, I felt guilty feeling it, but it was the truth because they knew bringing another child into their home would bring about more destruction than it ever would any ounce of happiness. And it's so sad to see them both having a feeling of relief, but it's the reality of being in a home where there's so much violence and destruction, where there's no place for another child to be happy in the home because they're all suffering right now at the hands of Teddy and at the hands of Marie. And so I think, again, it's just so depressing to see that this is their feeling of relief over a situation like this.
I think to add to that as well is that they would have to look after the baby. We've seen that they have to look after the children. So it's just another mouth technically for them to feed. I mean, we know that Joey's working in a garage, so it's another mouth for him to feed. It's another baby for her to look after. We know she does the babysitting, the cooking, the cleaning on the weekends. So it's just another baby for them to look after because their parents categorically don't. So not only do they have the violence and the destruction, they are the mother and the father to those children. So while she births them, they have to look after it. So then they're having these feelings of intense guilt because they're like, they essentially, are happy that they're not having another sibling, but at the same time, they physically, emotionally, and mentally cannot deal with looking after another child because that's what they have to do. That's what their dynamic is.
So when Joey and Shannon arrive home and he parks the car, Shannon unbuckles her seatbelt and Joey's continuously talking to her about what's going on in the home. And he literally says to her, I can't go back inside. So Shannon has the dawning realization that Joey is leaving. And she says, you can't be serious. Like, what are you talking about? And he says, I can't do it anymore. If I go back inside that house, I will kill them both. And we see Shannon have this moment of panic because now this is another person in her family who has left her. And she starts having flashbacks to what happened the last time they were in care. And one thing that she notes in this scene that I think a lot of people have forgotten about is she starts detailing what happened to Darren when he
Hmm.
was in care. And she literally says that she remembers how Darren was so severely sexually abused that he had to have surgeries to fix his internal organs because that is how violent his sexual assaults were. And so she starts having this moment of panic of like, what now? What's going to happen? And it's so, so hurtful to see Shannon having that feeling of abandonment again from yet another one of her siblings. And she's very aware of why Joey has to leave. She even notes that he has taken 18 years of abuse and how he can't take any more. And so it's so sad to see that Shannon has that realization of knowing why Joey has to leave, but she can't help but feel sorry for herself in a sense because now she knows
Hmm.
that she's once again all alone and she's lost Darren and now she's lost Joey who has been her biggest support ever since Darren left and honestly her entire life.
Yeah. And her and Joey, obviously, she calls herself at the very beginning, she calls them the two amigos and how close they are and how, like, and he makes plans of he's going to take her with him. And now he's actually leaving and he's leaving her behind and leaving her on her own. So she's like, oh my God, like, this is it. I'm in it on my own now. And I've got to go back into this house that I don't want to be in, that I don't love, that I don't like, and be with these parents who aren't good to me. And also, I think in this chapter, Joey talks about maybe they should do what Aoife suggests in going and speaking to the police. And she's like, no, because of what? And that's when she starts detailing all the horrific things that Darren had been through. And I'm pretty sure Shan remarks, maybe next time Teddy will get her to Joey. I'm pretty sure she says to him, maybe you'll all get lucky and maybe next time he'll actually get me. And Joey like is crying and he's like, don't say that. And it's a link back to her depression where she feels like everyone would be better off without her and she's sort of hitting rock bottom and she says to herself like, oh, maybe I should go back to Johnny's and ask him for help because I know he would help me, like I trust him. And she's also thinking about, she's having that suicidal ideation, which I think is really overlooked how depressed Shan was in the situation that she is, because she kind of glazes over it quite a lot. Like she'll throw in the odd sentence like there where she's like, we'll all get lucky and everyone will be better off without me. And Joey's really upset about it. But like, it shows her state of mind and how she's feeling about herself in the situation that she's in.
Yeah, and I think the other sad part about the scene is where Joey says that if he attacks you again, I want you to get the biggest knife you can find and drive it through his heart. And you know that he's being serious. And it's so
Yeah.
sad to see two siblings who are caught in a cycle of abuse where your older brother's literally telling you but the moment he puts his hands on you again, I want you to kill him. And it's just so sad that this is the reality and that Joey has to give her this instruction because he knows that he's not going to be there the next time that Teddy inevitably does put his hands on Shannon.
What's really interesting about what Shan's going through is linking back to the contrast we were talking about. While Shan's there at home living this reality where Joe's no longer going to be there, Johnny, when we revert to his chapter in chapter 40, he says he's been feeling all weekend like she needs him. He like can't sleep, he can't relax. He just has this gut feeling that she needs him, and he knows that she's being hurt. He just can't figure out from who she's being hurt, and he really wants to figure it out. He really wants to know, and he really wants to help her. Gibsy then comes round, and he has the realization that Shannon actually means so much to him, and Gibbs is being like, there's no reason you can't be friends with her, like that you can be friends with her if you want to be. And he's kind of coming around to the idea that he might as well try to be because he can't stay away from her. And he then tells Gibbs that he confided in her about his injury, and how monumentous that is for him. And even Gibbs is like, wow, that's pretty big for you. And he expresses guilt for how he reacted to her in the car that day, which goes to show that Johnny's been thinking about it. So he is remorseful of his shitty behaviors when he shows them, and how he was quite mean to Shan because he was really reacting to being terrified that his dream's going to get taken away. And he's saying to Gibbs, like, oh, I feel really bad about that. Like, I'm really worried about how I made her feel then. And he's just showing remorse and guilt, which just shows the kind of person that Johnny is, because by now it's been like months. It's been a long time since that interaction took place. And he's still thinking about it and still feeling guilt about it.
During this conversation with Gibsy, Johnny's very mindful of what he'll even tell Gibsy about Shannon because he's very protective of her and what she's actually been through. But he does tell Gibsy, like, Shannon is very fragile. And Gibsy kind of says, oh, is it because of what's in her file? And Johnny kind of perks up for a second and Gibsy's like, relax, I didn't read the file. I gave it right back to Dee. We see how cognizant Johnny is of Shannon and her past and how he wants to protect her and he wants to be there for her. But again, he keeps going back to the fact that that is just not where his priority is. We see him having that internal conflict of wanting Shannon, but also wanting to stay away from Shannon. But at the
Yeah.
end of the chapter, he kind of comes to the realization, I've got to stay away from Shannon. I've got to refocus. We see continuously how Donnie seems to think that his only focus can be rugby and how he can't have Shannon and rugby. And so it's kind of, so it's interesting to see him try to grapple with these two things that he very clearly wants, but never being able to actually figure out how to have both things at once. One of the things I think is really funny at the end of this interaction is how Gibbsy says, I'll help you stay away from Shannon, but I just know I'm going to be giving your best man speech at your wedding when you guys inevitably get married. So I just think it's so funny how perceptive Gibbsy is. And he knows that even though Johnny wants to stay away from Shannon, it's never going to happen. This concludes this week's episode. We ended on chapter 40. Next week, we'll pick back up on chapter 41. And this is going to be the aftermath of Joey leaving the home. And we have Teddy who's back in the home. And so we'll be picking back up there. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Chapter Chats. We'll see you again next week.